Did try to ask the president as he was walking out of the East Room, could he talk about his personal attorney Rudy Giuliani and what went on in Ukraine. He did not answer that question. I'm not even sure if he heard the question as he was leaving the East Room, but you saw what he was saying just a short while ago in the Oval Office when he was sitting down with the Australian Prime Minister, when he did not really answer the question whether or not he spoke with the Ukrainian Prime Minister about former Vice President Joe Biden, at one point saying it doesn't matter what he discussed. But there are plenty of contradictions here that the president offered up to reporters when he was sitting down in the Oval Office, at one point describing the whistleblower as being partisan and part of a hack job, but at the same time saying he doesn't know who the whistleblower is. The White House is not saying at this point whether or not they know who this whistleblower is, specifically who the individual is who filed that whistleblower complaint that's being blocked by the administration in terms of being turned over to Congress. But at this point, Brianna, we have a lot more questions than we have answers, and the White House at this point appears to be stonewalling the Congress when it comes to getting information on this complaint. And the president, as you saw during that spray in the Oval Office with reporters, was just not answering questions in a straightforward fashion in terms of what he talked about with the Ukrainian president about Vice President Joe Biden and whether or not there was some kind of offer on the table in that conversation. Those are all questions that are out there hanging over this administration. Despite what the president had to say about Iran and China during that news conference, he was patting himself on the back, saying he was showing great restraint when it comes to Iran and pledging once again that he'll find some sort of trade peace with China. But it just seems that this whistleblower complaint is hanging over everything at the White House, and the president and his top officials are just not providing any answers, Brianna.
This is an exasperated Jim Acosta outlining the ways in which Trump is stonewalling yet another investigation into yet another effort to have a foreign power interfere in our election. This comes in the aftermath of a confluence of multiple different developments, all landing at exactly the same time. First, Rudy Giuliani went on CNN yesterday to remind the world in deranged fashion that he's been lobbying the Ukrainian government to open an investigation into the current Democratic frontrunner, Joe Biden.
Did you ask the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden?
No, actually I didn't. I asked the Ukraine to investigate the allegations that there was interference in the election of 2016 by the Ukrainians for the benefit of Hillary Clinton, for which there already is a court finding.
You never asked anything about Hunter Biden. You never asked anything about Joe Biden.
The only thing I asked
about
Joe Biden is to get to the bottom of how it was that Lutsenko, who was appointed, dismissed the case against Antak.
So you did ask Ukraine to look into Joe Biden?
Of course I did.
You just said you didn't.
No, I didn't ask him to look into Joe Biden. I asked him to look into the allegations that related to my client, which tangentially involved Joe Biden in a massive bribery scheme,
Rudy,
not unlike what he did in China.
Rudy,
you explain to me how the kid got $1.5 billion
Rudy,
from China.
I have no problem with you launching allegations, but just be careful about what you say. I asked you, did you ask Ukraine to look at Joe Biden? You said no. Then you went on to say that you did.
I didn't say
recorded.
In fact, it was just confirmed that during his phone call with the Ukrainian president, Trump urged his counterpart 8 times to work with Giuliani and investigate Biden. Then we found out about a whistleblower complaint that Trump's DOJ and DNI are refusing to release to Congress, which alleges a promise that Trump made with a foreign leader. And finally, there's Trump withholding $250 million in military assistance to Ukraine, which was only reinstated once the media started reporting on it. And I know what you're thinking. What could holding military aid to a country while simultaneously asking that country to open an investigation into a political opponent and a whistleblower complaining about an improper request by the president all possibly have in common? Yeah, nothing comes to mind for me either. Now, Jim Acosta explains here that Trump says what he discussed with the Ukrainian president doesn't matter. Only it does, because either nothing improper was discussed, in which case it shouldn't be an issue to simply disclose it, or something improper was discussed, in which case it needs to be revealed. And that's the part that Trump doesn't seem to realize in his eternal deal-making genius. It's really hard to believe his promises that he did nothing wrong when his response is to desperately hide and distract and obfuscate. But worst of all are Trump's efforts to stonewall. And look, If the President of the United States making it difficult for everyone to get to the bottom of his efforts to coordinate with a foreign power to interfere in our elections sound familiar, then you might just be old enough to remember the last time Trump did it. And despite a 2-year investigation proving that his campaign did in fact coordinate with Russia, through the Trump Tower meeting for dirt on Hillary Clinton, through sharing polling data, through discussions to lift sanctions, through requests on national television for the Russians to hack into Hillary Clinton's emails, Trump is still claiming that there was no collusion whatsoever. So if he's digging in his heels when there's clear-cut evidence proving his guilt when it comes to Russia, then the likelihood of simply volunteering any information on a brand new scandal with Ukraine is literally zero. The fact is that Democrats have no excuse to continue their tepid political maneuvering. Either they care about the rule of law or they don't, because Trump has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he'll break every law, fracture every alliance, that he'll stonewall and lie, that he'll do whatever is necessary to stay in power. But Democrats just took the House by the biggest margin in US history. They need to use their mandate and exercise the powers available to them. It doesn't matter if it's an election year, it doesn't matter if the Senate won't convict him, it doesn't matter if the GOP will use it in campaign ads in the Midwest. Trump will commit crimes because he's seen that he can get away with it. So Democrats choosing to do nothing is effectively giving him permission to do it again. The fact is that while we might be used to this president's corruption out in the open, that doesn't make it acceptable. And whereas the Republican Party can't manage to find any semblance of a spine, Democrats need to before the crimes of 2016 repeat themselves.